You're listening to 93.3 WMMR. This is Public Affairs. I'm your host, Marcus Goldman. With me today is the highest-ranking military officer ever elected to Congress. He is now running for the Senate seat of Pennsylvania and will face incumbent Arlen Specter for the Democratic nomination in the primary on May 18. Please welcome Congressman Joe Sestak. Joe, thank you so much for coming back in today.
Good to be back on board on this radio show, so thank you.
It's great to have you back in the studio as well, Joe. The last time you were here, the healthcare debate was hot and heavy, and it continues to be so. It also seems like there have been a lot of changes made to the original healthcare plan. Has this been difficult for you as a congressman?
Well, I'm satisfied that the House bill that we passed last summer is a plan that America needs to have because it actually decreased premiums by 1/4 in their pricing in the next 6 years. Not only that, it covered everyone. And if you wanted to come in for preventive screening for breast cancer or for glaucoma in your eyes, no copay. And seniors wouldn't have to pay that Medicare donut hole. And they also get preventive care. This was a very good bill. And it decreased taxes of health care that small companies have to pay of 18% more than large corporations for their health care bill because they can't spread the risk of one sick worker by 18%. This was a good bill. However, the Senate side, you're right, Marcus, I'm very disappointed on. I was actually disappointed even more about how they closed the deal. It wasn't a principle compromise, it was a compromise of principles. And now we're in conference, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that Pennsylvanians have the right health care coverage.
I know the stimulus package has been mentioned a lot, and some things that I've read throughout the papers is that maybe the people of Pennsylvania don't feel that with the stimulus money we got, we have not created enough jobs.
The stimulus bill should have been called the Slow the Hemorrhaging of Jobs bill.
Okay.
Because last January, we lost 700,000 jobs, and the same in February and March. The last 2 months, well, this last month we lost 85,000. The month before, we gained 4,000 jobs. So we've slowed it down. Now what we need is tax incentives for small businesses, tax cuts for small businesses, credits if they actually hire people and create a job. And small community banks that lend to small businesses actually should have their loans guaranteed. Why? Because the majority of Pennsylvanians work or own a small business. And that's where we need to begin to soak up our unemployment. Look, both of these two issues should have been dealt with or not having to deal with them. Let me give you an example. The Clinton health care plan in the 1994 would have done just as good a job as our plan in the House side. But Arlen Specter actually stopped that bill dead in its tracks and hangs a trophy of it in his office. And the economic stimulus bill, we never should have had to even vote on it if he and the GOP, the Republican leadership, had not voted for the failed economic policies of the Bush administration and tax cuts that went to the top 1% of wage earners, the millionaires. In short, we've got to make sure that the next 30 years are totally done in a different approach than particularly the last 8 years. We can't afford another 36 years of Arlen Specter. I believe that.
When you mention the fact that for the next 30 years we need to undo what's been done over the last 8, do you think it's possible to do that? And do you think it's possible to do that by helping the everyday person versus the corporation?
It has to be done that way. Look, let me just give a few examples. The GOP leadership and others, Arlen Specter, voted not to regulate Wall Street, and then they gambled, played roulette with the savings of the working families and their home mortgages. He voted to send jobs overseas with tax loopholes for large corporations that can actually keep their profits overseas and not bring them home to be taxed. And then he voted for the largest education cut in the history of America, a 1/3 cut. And then he voted against Pell Grants, which are meant to help our youth go to college. And then those tax cuts that he voted for, and that Rick Santorum and George Bush both said Arlen Specter was the critical vote in making the tax cuts happen. 53% of them went to the top 1% of wage earners, the millionaires. Is there a different approach? Absolutely. I do it every day in my district. Small businesses used to get 6% of all federal contracts. Now we're at 18% because we showed them how they applied for it. And I have a bill that says before you give a defense contract to a large corporation, the contracting officer must see if a small business can do it. I moved the first money in 12 years into autism. And we know 1 out of every 120 boys and girls born today is autistic. I worked hard to increase Pell Grants by $1,000, and we're going to increase another $2,000 as we've authorized in the years to come. And in healthcare, I got in, not to stop healthcare, but to have everyone have it, because in the military, when I served, we were healthy warriors, and the dividends to our nation were great. We lose $160 billion a year because of lost productivity, the under and uninsured. Focus on the middle class, and that's why I want to be the senator that represents Pennsylvania and works for the middle class, and I'm willing to lose my job to stand up for them.
You mentioned a whole bunch of things that I do want to jump to, but before we continue on those, let's give out your website and your phone number so that people can do some research on what you stand for, how you represent the people, and if they have questions, they can contact you.
Absolutely. My website is www.joesestak.com. Sestak is spelled SESTAK. www.joesestak.com or 610-891-8956. We're located in Media and Delaware County, and I'd love to have people support and answer questions.
Your website says that you have handled over 10,000 constituent cases. Could you explain this, please, and what are these constituent cases that you handle?
Absolutely. We've handled, in the years I've been in Congress, three times the average congressional workload of constituency cases, because we keep our office open 7 days a week. You call my office on a Saturday evening, and we're there. Whatever anybody hears this, we'll be open unless it's 1 a.m. in the morning. We do that because we need to do it. For example, a woman came in with cervical cancer and said her insurance company denied her the treatment the doctor had recommended. A couple came in, and their son had stunted growth. An insurance company denied that young boy the type of hormonal treatment that the doctor had recommended. We have handled well over 550 mortgage foreclosures, and we got about a 60% batting record where we bring them into the companies and say, wait a minute, can't we work this out? We have had vets even call us, believe it or not, from Germany, a Korea War vet, who asked if he could come home and be in a VA hospice. We did a few weeks ago. He just passed away about 3 or 4 days ago, but he came home and was there with his brethren that he had served with. How can I not keep that office open when there's so much to be done? Because we have been sent into a tailspin by the Republican leadership. I went to Washington to oppose that, and that's what I want to keep to change, except in the Senate.
You just mentioned something very interesting about this military man coming back, and that story is quite impressive, that you were able to get this guy back home and let him pass away on U.S. soil, which is obviously what he had wanted. And I'm sure making something like that come true definitely isn't easy. Now, as we mentioned earlier, you have a big military background. You have many accomplishments and many successes in the military. How can you use your military background to stop and help defeat the war on terrorism?
Absolutely. What I learned when I worked for President Clinton as his director for defense policy, when I was in the ground early in the war in Afghanistan as head of the Navy's anti-terrorism unit for a very short period of time, but I then came out and took command of a carrier battle group with retaliatory strikes, I learned the limits of military power. What I learned was, don't engage yourself in this world, leading first with our military. The power of our diplomacy, of our economy, of our ideals. I learned that people around this world actually respect us for our military, yes, and for the power of our economy, but they admire us for the power of our ideals. We could do more for the global war of terror in fixing the illiteracy rate of women in Afghanistan and Pakistan, which we can't do right now because of that tragic war in Iraq we went to, and that was the misuse of our military. And now we have a safe haven for Al-Qaeda in Pakistan. Arlen Specter and those who voted for that tragic war in Iraq have given us a much larger challenge today in the global war of terror. So I want to use my expertise to say, yes, we still must pursue them along with Pakistan to eradicate that. But we can't be having an open-ended commitment and must have an exit strategy by which we measure success and failure. And if the cost becomes too much, exit to an alternative, although probably a less good strategy.
And with the situation that actually happened on Christmas Day, do you think that as a country we handled it well, or do you think that we could have handled it better?
No. I disagreed with the Secretary of Homeland Defense that said the system worked. It did not work. The information was there in disparate parts of the bureaucracy. It never came together as knowledge. And that's part of the culture that has to change. Look, I believe in our Commander-in-Chief, President Obama. He is doing exactly what we need to be done and leading us into a strategy of engagement. But there are still culture wars within the bureaucracy to where the FBI thinks if it has information, how well can I bring my information to be doing my job better, rather than saying, let me share it quickly, rapidly, even though the CIA or the Defense Department, I'm not sure, need it, but they may have other pieces of the puzzle to put it together as knowledge. I saw that all the time, and we must change that above anything else. Knowledge is power today in the global war of terror to protect America.
You know, it's interesting that you said that. And with the fact that we have the technology that we have the military that we have, the fact that there's no communication between the departments makes no sense, because obviously that situation wouldn't have even come to where it got to had we all communicated with each other the way we should have. It boggles my mind that we have the power we have, and the one area that it seems that America continues to fail is with communication.
Well, you know, it's interesting. As you are aware, I'm running against the Democratic establishment because I believe we have to be Democrats of principle, fighting hard for the working middle class. But I also did the same in the Navy. When I was a 3-star admiral, I moved monies, and I was responsible for, and said, we don't need 315 ships. 250 hulls, quite sufficient. Move monies into networks that help us work with the Coast Guard in protecting our strategic approaches of the water so we can rapidly pass information. Networks that link in with the FBI and with the CIA, who is overseas, and other types of knowledge base. We did that, and then there was a change in leadership, and we didn't want to do it anymore. And so I found that even there, as we tried to affect change, that it's hard to break a hidebound past. And we need people down there who understand this, particularly in the Senate, and can make it happen.
And some things that you keep mentioning, it shows that there is a problem with bipartisan politics, people not working together because of the party that they represent. How is that working for the people? And if you are elected senator, how will you fix the situation so that America can move out of this tailspin that we're in and get on the right track? And it seems that the only way we can do it is if everybody works together.
Without a question. It is something I think that I felt President Obama wasn't supported in. He came down there with an effort of wanting to change politics, but I felt that he did not have the titans in the Senate or the House who had forgotten that the days of the Hatfields and the McCoys should be over. And that while you should never have a compromise of principles, as I mentioned, you can have a principled compromise. Because the thing that most harms Americans today is not, as some say, just the Republican opposition. It's the lack of trust that everybody down there is in it for themselves. That they're not willing to stand up for principle and do it for them. I believe that there are still some down there that if you were willing to work together and not just cast the issue as a personality issue of the other side, that you can still vote it. I've done it. I've done it with a Republican and changing and going against President Bush, where he denied payments to those who had been tortured in the first Gulf War to get it from Iraqi money that was sitting here in the banks in America. He vetoed a defense bill for that. I went to see a Republican leader on the other side, and we effected a change into the bill to get to start to pass that through.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, actually helping the vets, because I think that's another area that our government overall has failed in, and that goes back to the days of Vietnam. When our vets come back, I don't know if people realize that they see some awful things that most people could not handle when they're at war. And the smell of burning dead bodies, I probably shouldn't go into specific examples, but those are things that people smell, see, and hear. And you being in military may have experienced that as well. And the fact that we're not offering them the support that they need to come back and adjust to a completely different life is awful. And how are you going to help these young kids that are coming back the way they did in Vietnam so that they can be adjusted?
By the exact opposite way that Arlen Specter did not do it as chairman of the Veterans Committee in the Senate. While he was there, he actually underfunded the Veterans Administration, the 2 years he was chairman, by $2 billion each year. He voted in 2005 against post-traumatic stress disorders, increase in funding for it, and stood by as the Bush administration kicked out of the VA those veterans who happened to earn as little as $29,000 are Priority 8 veterans, and today 1 million veterans are denied care that they should have. And as chairman, he let the claims reach up to 600,000 backlog. Since I've been in Congress in the the last 3 years, we have increased funding $10 billion for post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury. We have actually, through an amendment of mine, gotten 15% of those Priority 8 veterans back. $375 million I found working hard, and we didn't add it to the debt. We found other programs that were less important to cut. And now 15% are covered, and in the next 5 years, we have in the bill that's working to have 85% of them covered again. I spent Veterans Day, and by the way, 3,500 caseworkers to fix the backlog that Specter left us with those 600,000. Is enough being done? No. I went into and spent Veterans Day in the prison in the city of Chester, visiting vets who were there because of dependency on drugs or alcohol, to where they then committed a crime. They often, as two of them said, they had been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. They came home, didn't go to VA, there was nothing there for them, they felt. They then committed a crime as they needed drug help. What are we doing for those vets? I then met 42 of them that are in a rehab place for it. In short, the tragedy of that war in Iraq that Specter took us into. The failure to then even sufficiently fund our Veterans Administration as he was chairman, I cannot forgive that. Our veterans are willing to give their lives for us. We owe them more than a handshake. We kicked them to the side of the curve in the Vietnam War. Now we maybe give them a handshake, but they're coming home without jobs in a recession. There's more to be done. And that's why in the economic stimulus bill, I helped insert that if you hire a veteran, we'll pay up to $6,000 of her salary. Those are the kinds of initiatives to take care of vets I want to be proud of doing as senator.
I think the military who come home from war running the TSA and the airport security. Somebody without a high school diploma who has no experience in reading people and no experience in those type of situations will not be able to tell if somebody's walking with a shoe bomb onto the plane. But if you have somebody who's trained in the military, they can smell when something's wrong. It becomes instinct after a while. And if you've been to war, you smell it and you know what I'm talking about. I've never experienced it, but that's something that I would think a lot of people would be able to understand, because it makes sense.
What an attractive idea. But it also lays alongside of one we're working on. There's a lawyer who has helped bring to our attention how government agencies, although they're supposed to give priority to veterans, seem not to. And we're actually now working with her, trying to ensure that now we can affect legislation or oversight to make sure that those veterans who are actually supposed to be given priority for having served our nation are not. They're actually being sidestepped, our own U.S. government. So thanks for that other kind of idea.
It seems like a good way to put them back to work, and they're using everything that they've trained for, and God forbid are ever in a situation where they're needed, they're still fresh on their skills and don't need to go back to training because they're continually getting that training, and therefore we are better equipped to fight the war on terror without spending ridiculous gobs of money. Maybe I'm being idealistic. I don't know.
Or just cost efficient.
I don't know. And I know from your end it's frustrating, and from our end, the everyday people who see what's going on, it's frustrating as well. And like, for example, I think recently I read that we're creating a bill. We've got a bill that we're creating to create jobs. Why do we need a bill to create jobs? Why can't we just create jobs because they're there for the taking?
Well, you know, it's interesting. That bill did have some things in it, but it was missing something. And I think it gets to your point. Job creation is done best by small businesses. It's done best by creating the incentives for the entrepreneurship of our men and women right here in Pennsylvania to create their own jobs. And that's why I had up to 7 initiatives in that to try to get in that bill, which did not get in and should have been in there, because in the last recession, small businesses, as we came out of the 2002 recession, created 80% of the jobs. And we are not doing this. The president spoke up about it again 2 days ago, and hopefully this will get in. And you know, it's because for far too long, our representatives down in Washington, D.C., in the Senate particularly, as Arlen Specter has sided on the side of big business. Do you know we give oil companies, fossil fuel companies, $80 billion in tax cuts?
And we're paying $3 a gallon.
And we cannot give small businesses, let's remove some of those since they're making record profits the last 5 or 7 years, and let's give those to small businesses. These are people who live right next door and want to be able to have the access to capital to create jobs. Let's imagine this. For every job created, a 15% tax credit. Imagine if you invest in a small business business. For 5 years, no capital gains tax, a small business. And imagine if a community bank, which always loans to small business, that we would guarantee the loan because they're a little worried now in this recession, up to 98% to guarantee that loan. And imagine a small business administration to help with a Bush administration that our inspector sided with had not slashed its budget by 40% and then said, as it wasn't in the Clinton administration, when you apply for a loan, you now have to pay a fee. These are small entrepreneurs. These are microloans, often as little as $35,000 people are applying for. And they actually would not help those who we live next door, but they did support $80 billion in tax cuts for those oil companies, and I think that's outrageous.
Interesting. Well, it's obvious that from what you say, you're definitely more about the people than about the corporation. And again, I don't want to slam on corporate America because there's goods to it as well, but it seems that for America to work best, the everyday man has to have more involvement because that's where the strength and the fabric of America is.
You're absolutely right. The engine of our economy is the working family. Unfortunately, over the last 8 years, as Specter voted for those tax cuts that went to the very wealthy, deregulated Wall Street, he benefited those who benefit from the economy. The engine of the economy is our working family, and yet under what George Bush's policy that was supported by Rick Santorum, lockstep with Arlen Specter, between 2001 and 2007, just before the recession, if you compared the income of 50% of the families in Pennsylvania in real terms, they were earning $2,000 less. As health premiums doubled and the cost of a public tuition in Pennsylvania went up 65%. Are you telling me that our senator had his focus on our working families? He should have, and not Wall Street, and not tax loopholes that sent jobs overseas. Look, this is about a change, a generational change with new ideas and new energy. Will you actually believe that the working family, given an opportunity, with the right health coverage, with the educational opportunity, a shared responsibility between individual, business, and society, can take rugged individualism, align it with a common enterprise, and have America outcompete any China, any India?
Oh, I agree with you 100%. And that brings up another point. During the Great Depression, when FDR ended up becoming president, one of the things that he did to keep hope amongst the people was he increased funding for the arts, he increased funding for education, and he did the things that were necessary to keep the morale high. And as it turned out, we ended up recovering much quicker than the rest of the world because of these types of things. Why will we not look back at some of the things that worked before and try to use some of those molds to set the course right now?
You know, you're right. I went to the Education and Labor Committee because I had learned in the Navy that when I first went there, and I had 5 chief petty officers, one in the early 70s when I had him had graduated from high school. Only one, and that was fine back then. Today, when I compare a battle group and we were jamming satellites, shooting missiles 1,000 miles, you couldn't be a senior chief petty officer unless you'd earned an associate's college degree in technology. Our money, your time, but we needed them to be knowledgeable warriors. Why did Arlen Specter vote against Pell Grants to send kids to college? Why did he vote for the largest cut in the history of America in education? Why? And so I stepped aside and I went to the Education Committee to cut the federal interest rate that we charge kids from 6.8 to 3.4 to increase Pell Grants by over $1,000. And this year we found $85 billion in addition under a pay-as-you-go government by cutting out a middleman from the government who was taking our loans and then charging a fee, cut that out, and now we have $85 billion that we found this year for additional help to students go to college. And why is this important? Because by 2022, over 4 million youth won't go to college because of cost. What a change. And arts, I always remember what John F. Kennedy said. I look forward to an America that's as recognized for its achievements in the arts as for its achievements in business and statecraft. Our city of Philadelphia and Reddings and Pittsburgh, remember, they are not supposed to be, and we've neglected our cities. I mean, John F. Kennedy also said you neglect your cities at your peril. Why? Because they are the engine of our economy, the incubator of technology, but they're also the proving ground of art, as well as a great display of the diversity of America. How have we neglected so much too long? Can we be great? Absolutely. Let's just keep on driving for the health security, education security, all those types of securities families want to be all they can be.
Now let's give that website out again, the phone number, and then we will wrap everything up.
Our website is www.joesestak.com. www.joesestak.com. SESTAK, www.joesestak.com. And our phone number is 610-891-8956. 610-891-8956. And Marcus, I promise you, as senator, I will be the most honest, hardworking, energetic, and most accountable leader you can have. Pennsylvania needs a leadership where truly you're in it, as I was for my sailors in the Navy. You're now in it for the working family, and your job as a senator is so secondary, it doesn't matter.
Thank you very much for stopping by, and best of luck to you in your campaign for winning state senator of Pennsylvania.
Thanks, Marcus. Happy to have been here.
Thank you. You're listening to 93.3 WMMR. This is Public Affairs. I'm your host, Mark.